The scent of stale coffee and betrayal hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the sweet fragrance of the lilies clutched in Victoria's trembling hand. It was their 3rd anniversary, a day that had dawned with whispered promises and gentle caresses from her husband, Edward Thorne. Now standing outside the gleaming chrome and glass edifice of Thorne Holdings, a wave of nausea sharper than her usual morning sickness washed over her. It wasn't just the 6 months of pregnancy pressing on her bladder. It was a gut-wrenching premonition, a cold dread that whispered a serpent had slithered into her perfect paradise. The serpent, she would soon discover, wore a Serpensa gown and was comfortably seated in her chair. Victoria had always believed in fairy tales. How could she not? She was living in one. From a humble background working as a junior art curator, she had met Edward Thorne, the billionaire real estate magnate at a charity auction. He was older, devastatingly handsome, with eyes the color of a stormy sea that seemed to see right into her soul. He had pursued her with a relentless old-world charm, showering her with affection, respect, and a life she had only ever dreamed of. Their wedding was a lavish affair, a feature in Luxe Living magazine, and their life together in their sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park was by all accounts perfect. Now 6 months pregnant with their first child, a son. Victoria felt a completeness she had never known. Edward was ecstatic, attentive, and more loving than ever. He'd personally overseen the design of the nursery, a masterpiece of soft blues and creams with a hand-painted mural of whimsical hot air balloons. He would talk to her belly for hours, telling their unborn son about the adventures they would have, the empires he would one day inherit. That morning had been no different. He'd woken her with a kiss, a single perfect red rose on her pillow, and the whispered words, "Happy anniversary, my love. Tonight we celebrate." He had a board meeting, a crucial one, he'd said, but promised to be home early for a special dinner he had planned. Victoria had spent the day in a state of blissful anticipation. She'd had a prenatal massage, bought a new, elegant maternity gown from Seraphine, and decided to surprise Edward at his office with his favorite lunch, a bespoke bento box from Nobu. She wanted to see the look on his face, that heart-stopping smile that always made her feel like the most cherished woman in the world. As she stepped out of the private elevator that opened directly into the executive suite of Thorne Holdings, she was greeted by Edward's long-suffering but impeccably polite secretary, a woman in her late 50s named Margaret. Mrs. Thorne. "What a lovely surprise," Margaret said, her smile a little tighter than usual. "Mr. Thorne is in a meeting at the moment." "Oh, I know, Victoria," said her own smile radiant. "He told me it was an important one. I just wanted to drop off his lunch. And these," she added, gesturing to the bouquet of white lilies, Edward's favorite. Margaret's eyes flickered towards the double doors of Edward's office, a flicker so brief Victoria almost missed it. "Of course, I can take them in for you." "Nonsense, Margaret. I'll just pop in for a second." "He won't mind," Victoria said, her voice light and breezy. She moved towards the doors, a sense of playful excitement bubbling within her. "Mrs. Thorne, perhaps it's best to wait." Margaret's voice was strained, a note of desperation creeping in. But Victoria was already pushing open the heavy oak doors. The scene that greeted her was one that would be seared into her memory for the rest of her life, a tableau of such profound betrayal that it stole the very breath from her lungs. The office was as grand and imposing as the man who occupied it. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a concrete jungle that Edward had conquered. His massive mahogany desk was usually a controlled chaos of files and blueprints, but today It was what was happening in front of the desk that held Victoria's horrified gaze. There in the plush, custom-made leather chair that Edward had always called Victoria's chair, the one she sat in when she visited him, the one where they'd shared countless conversations and dreams, sat a woman. Her long raven hair was styled in a sleek, sophisticated bob. She was wearing a slinky and emerald green owned by Spencer, a dress that clung to her slender frame like a second skin. Her legs were crossed a stiletto-heeled shoe from Louboutin, dangling provocatively from her foot. And on his knees before her was her husband, Edward Thorne. His head was in her lap, his shoulders shaking with what Victoria, in her naivety first thought, was grief. The woman was stroking his hair, her long, crimson-nailed fingers tracing patterns on his scalp. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, no one moved. The bento box slipped from Victoria's numb fingers, clattering to the polished marble floor. The sound, a sharp, jarring note, in the suffocating silence, broke the spell. Edward's head shot up. His sea-storm eyes, usually filled with adoration for her, were now wide with a mixture of shock, guilt, and something else. Something Victoria couldn't quite decipher. A flicker of anger. The woman in the chair, however, showed no such discomposure. She simply tilted her head, a slow, languid movement, and a smug, triumphant smile spread across her perfectly painted lips. Victoria knew her. Of course she knew her. It was Isabella Romano, the fiercely ambitious, notoriously ruthless chief operating officer of Thorne Holdings. A woman Edward had always described as brilliant, but a shark. Victoria had met her at company galas, had exchanged polite, meaningless pleasantries with her. She had never liked her, had always felt a strange, unsettling energy from her. Now she knew why. Victoria Edward gasped, scrambling to his feet. He looked disheveled, his usually immaculate suit rumpled, his tie loosened. This isn't what it looks like. The classic, pathetic cliché hung in the air, a testament to the depth of his deceit. Victoria's gaze moved from her husband's guilty face to the woman who was now slowly, deliberately standing up. Isabella was taller than Victoria had realized her presence, commanding her green eyes, cold and assessing. She ran a hand down her dress, smoothing out a non-existent wrinkle, a gesture of pure, unadulterated arrogance. "Isn't it?" Isabella's voice was like honey laced with arsenic. "It looks to me like your husband was seeking a little comfort. The pressures of a multi-billion-dollar empire, you know. They can be so draining." The condescension in her tone was a physical blow. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. The lilies, once a symbol of her love and celebration, now felt like a funeral wreath in her hand. "Get out of my chair." Victoria's voice was a hoarse whisper, barely audible. Isabella raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Your chair? Darling, this is the seat of power, and as you can see, it's currently occupied." "Edward." Victoria's voice cracked, and she finally looked at her husband, her eyes pleading with him to deny it, to fix this, to wake her from this living nightmare. "Tell her to get out." Edward ran a hand through his hair, his face a mask of turmoil. He looked from his devastated pregnant wife to his coolly composed mistress. The silence in the room was a roaring inferno, consuming the last vestiges of Victoria's fairy tale. "Isabella Edward," finally said, his voice strained. "Perhaps you should go." Isabella let out a low, throaty laugh. "Go. But we were just getting to the good part, weren't we, Edward? The part where you tell me how you're going to leave this relic of a marriage, and finally be with a woman who understands your world, your ambition. That's enough. Edward snapped a flash of anger in his eyes, but the damage was done. The words once spoken could not be unsaid. They hung in the air, venomous and irrefutable. Victoria felt a sharp, stabbing pain in her abdomen. She gasped, her hand flying to her belly. The room began to spin, the panoramic view of the city blurring into a kaleidoscope of mocking lights. Victoria Edward cried out, taking a step towards her. "Don't touch me," she whispered, the words laced with a pain so profound it was almost a physical force. She took a step back, then another, her eyes never leaving his. She saw him not as the man she loved, the father of her child, but as a stranger, a liar, a betrayer. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she turned and fled. She didn't hear Edward calling her name, didn't hear Isabella's derisive laughter. The only sound was the frantic, terrified beating of her own heart, a drum beat marking the end of her world. She stumbled out of the office past a horrified Margaret, who rushed to her side. "Mrs. Thorne, are you all right?" "Let me call someone." But Victoria shook her head, pushing past her. She ran towards the elevator, her breath coming in ragged sobs. As the doors slid shut, she caught a final glimpse of Edward standing in the doorway of his office, his face a portrait of despair. But it was too late. The glass had shattered the pieces, too small, too sharp, to ever be put back together again. The fairy tale was over, and in its place a brutal, unforgiving reality had begun. The reality of a pregnant wife, a cheating husband, and a mistress who had not only stolen her man, but had also dared to sit in her chair. A war had been declared in that opulent office, and Victoria, with her unborn child as her only ally, knew she had to fight back. The naive girl who believed in fairy tales was gone. In her place, a woman scorned and determined was slowly, painfully being born. The elevator descended a metallic cage, plummeting Victoria back to a world that no longer made sense. Each floor it passed was a layer of her life being stripped away. The penthouse, their home, now felt like a gilded cage. The future she had so carefully, so lovingly built with Edward was now a pile of rubble at her feet. She stumbled out into the bustling lobby of Thorne Holdings, a ghost in a designer maternity dress. The security guards, men who usually greeted her with deferential smiles, now looked at her with a mixture of pity and confusion. She ignored them, pushing her way through the revolving doors and out into the jarring noise of the city. The cacophony of sirens' horns and the endless chatter of people was a stark contrast to the deafening silence in her heart. She didn't know where she was going. She just walked her feet, carrying her aimlessly through the crowded streets of Manhattan. The city that had once felt like a playground now felt like a labyrinth, each corner a reminder of a memory, now tainted by betrayal. A bistro, where they'd had their first date, a park where he had proposed a theater, where they'd shared their first public kiss. Each memory was a fresh stab of pain. Her phone buzzed incessantly in her purse. Edward. The name on the screen, once a source of comfort and joy, now ignited a fresh wave of nausea. She ignored it, letting the calls go to voicemail, each missed call a small act of defiance, a tiny reclaiming of her shattered self. Finally, her legs gave out. She found herself in front of a small independent art gallery in Soho, a place she hadn't visited since her life had been consumed by the whirlwind that was Edward Thorne. It was a world away from the high-stakes, high-society art auctions she now frequented. This was a place of raw, unpolished talent, a place where art was a passion, not an investment. She went inside, the familiar scent of oil paint and turpentine, a strangely comforting balm to her wounded soul. The gallery owner, a kind-faced bohemian woman named Clara, who had been a mentor to Victoria in her early career, looked up from her desk. Victoria. "My goodness, it's been too long," Clara said, her smile warm and genuine. But then she saw Victoria's face, the tear-streaked mascara, the haunted look in her eyes. The smile vanished, replaced by a look of deep concern. "My dear, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," Victoria whispered, her voice trembling. "I've seen the truth." And there, amidst the canvases of aspiring artists, the story of her perfect life's ugly underbelly came pouring out. She told Clara everything. The anniversary, the surprise, the scene in the office, the woman in her chair, the smug smile, the devastating words. She spoke until she was hoarse, until the tears had run dry, leaving behind a hollow ache in her chest. Clara listened patiently, her expression a mixture of sympathy and a quiet, simmering anger. When Victoria had finished, Clara took her hand, her touch firm and grounding. "Men like Edward Thorne," Clara said, her voice filled with a weary wisdom. "They build empires of glass and steel, but their hearts are often made of something far more fragile, far more corruptible. And women like Isabella Romano, they are the vultures who circle those empires, waiting for a moment of weakness." "What do I do?" Clara Victoria asked, her voice filled with a desperate plea. "I have nothing. My life, my home, my future. It was all tied to him." "You have yourself, Victoria," Clara said fiercely, "and you have that precious life inside you. That is not nothing. That is everything." Clara's words, simple yet profound, resonated deep within Victoria. For the first time since she had fled that office, a tiny spark of something other than despair flickered within her. It was a spark of anger, of a fight she didn't know she had in her. Meanwhile, back at Thorne Holdings, Edward was in a state of frantic panic. After Victoria had fled, he had turned on Isabella. His voice, a low, dangerous snarl. "Get out," he had said, his face pale with a mixture of fury and fear. Isabella, for the first time, looked taken aback. She had expected a different reaction. She had expected him to finally decisively choose her. "Edward, darling," she had purred, trying to regain control of the situation. "This is a blessing in disguise. Now we can be together openly." Together, Edward had laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "There is no us. There was never going to be an us. You were a diversion, a mistake." The words hit Isabella like a slap in the face. Her carefully constructed composure crumbled, revealing the raw, wounded pride beneath. "A mistake? I am not a mistake, Edward. I am your equal. I am the one who understands you, who challenges you. Not that simpering little doll you married. Don't you dare talk about her." Edward had roared, his voice echoing in the cavernous office. "You don't know the first thing about her." "I know that she's weak." Isabella had spat back her eyes, flashing with a venomous fire. "And I know that you will come crawling back to me. You always do." With that, she had stormed out of his office, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and shattered promises. Now alone in his office, the silence was a suffocating blanket. He looked at the spilled bento box, the scattered lilies, the symbols of his wife's love, now ruined on the floor. A wave of self-loathing washed over him so intense it almost brought him to his knees. What had he done? He had betrayed the one person who had loved him unconditionally, the one person who had brought light and warmth into his cold, sterile world. He called her phone again and again, each unanswered call a fresh twist of the knife in his gut. He called her friends, her mother, but no one had seen her. He was a man who could track a stock market fluctuation in real time, a man who could predict the rise and fall of global economies. But he couldn't find his own wife. He felt a helplessness that was entirely foreign to him, a terrifying void where his usual confidence and control used to be. He didn't know it yet, but the storm that was gathering was far bigger than a marital spat. Isabella, her pride wounded and her ambitions thwarted, was not a woman to be trifled with. She had been his confidant, his partner in ambition, and his lover. She knew his secrets, his vulnerabilities, his every weakness. And she was not about to go down without a fight. She had a plan, a contingency for every eventuality. And the humiliation she had just suffered had just activated her most ruthless one yet. And Victoria, cocooned in the quiet sanctuary of Clara's art gallery, was also undergoing a transformation. The tears had been shed. The shock was beginning to recede, replaced by old, hard clarity. She had been a fool, a naive girl playing dress-up in a world she didn't understand. But she was also a mother-to-be, and the fierce, primal instinct to protect her child was now a roaring fire in her veins. She looked at Clara, her eyes no longer filled with despair, but with a steely resolve. He's not going to get away with this, Clara. He thinks I'm weak. They both do, but they have no idea who they're dealing with. The battle lines had been drawn. On one side, a billionaire consumed by guilt and a desperate need for redemption. On the other, a scorned mistress armed with secrets and a thirst for revenge. And in the middle, a pregnant wife who had just discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. The storm was coming, and when it broke, it would threaten to destroy not just a marriage, but an entire world. The drama was just beginning, and the players were about to find out that hell hath no fury, like a woman and a mother scorned. The next few days were a blur of calculated moves and quiet desperation. Victoria, with Clara's help, found a small, discreet apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a far cry from the opulent penthouse that now felt like a mausoleum of broken dreams. She changed her number, creating a digital fortress around herself, a space where Edward's incessant calls and apologetic texts could not penetrate. She also made a crucial call, one that would set the stage for the battle to come. She called Arthur Vance, the most feared divorce lawyer in the city, a man known for his razor-sharp intellect and his take-no-prisoners approach to litigation. Mrs. Thorne. Arthur's voice was calm and measured over the phone. "I've been expecting your call." Victoria was taken aback. "You have?" When a man like Edward Thorne, a man with a net worth that rivals a small country's GDP, has a public indiscretion, the vultures start to circle. I, however, prefer to be the eagle. Victoria felt a flicker of hope. "I need your help, Mr. Vance. I want to leave him, but I want to do it on my own terms." "And what are your terms, Mrs. Thorne?" "I want to be financially independent," Victoria said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I want to secure my son's future. And I want to make sure that Isabella Romano does not profit from my pain." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Arthur Vance let out a low chuckle. "Mrs. Thorne, I do believe this is the beginning of a beautiful and very profitable partnership." Arthur's first piece of advice was simple, but powerful. Do not engage with him. Do not answer his calls. Do not respond to his messages. Let him stew in his own guilt. A desperate man makes mistakes, and we will be there to capitalize on every single one of them. And so Victoria began her new life in the shadows, a life of quiet determination. She started visiting the art gallery again, not as a patron, but as a collaborator. She began to use her knowledge of the art world, her eye for talent, to help Clara curate a new exhibition. The work was a welcome distraction, a way to channel her pain and anger into something productive, something that was hers, and hers alone. Meanwhile, Edward was a man on the brink. The silence from Victoria was a form of torture he had never experienced. He was used to getting what he wanted, to solving problems with a phone call or a checkbook. But this was different. This was a wound he couldn't close, a chasm he couldn't bridge. His work suffered. He was distracted, irritable, his Midas touch seemingly deserting him. He made a series of uncharacteristically poor business decisions, his mind clouded by the personal turmoil that consumed him. The board of Thorne Holdings, a group of powerful, ruthless men who cared more about profit margins than personal problems, were starting to get nervous. And then there was Isabella. After her dramatic exit from his office, she had become a ghost. She still came to work, her performance as impeccable as ever. But the easy camaraderie, the late-night brainstorming sessions, the stolen moments of intimacy, they were all gone. She was a block of ice, her green eyes holding a chillingly professional distance. She was playing a waiting game, and Edward, for all his business acumen, couldn't figure out her next move. He tried to apologize, to explain. He cornered her in her office one evening, his voice pleading. "Isabella, we need to talk." She looked up from her computer, her expression unreadable. "There's nothing to talk about, Edward. We had a professional relationship that crossed a line. It's over. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a quarterly report to finalize." Her coldness was more unnerving than any outburst of anger. He had underestimated her pride, her ambition, her capacity for revenge. The first move in Isabella's game of chess came a week later. An anonymous tip was leaked to a notorious gossip columnist, a man named Marco Diaz, whose online portal, The Diaz Report, was the scourge of the city's elite. The tip was simple, yet devastatingly effective. Edward Thorne, the golden boy of New York real estate, was having an affair with his COO, the formidable Isabella Romano. The story broke on a Tuesday morning, and it spread like wildfire. The headlines were salacious, the details embellished, but the core of the story was true. And it was enough to send shockwaves through the city's financial district. The board of Thorne Holdings called an emergency meeting. The company's stock, which had already been faltering due to Edward's erratic behavior, took a nosedive. The scandal was a breach of the company's code of conduct, a PR nightmare that threatened to tarnish the carefully crafted image of Thorne Holdings. Edward found himself in the crosshairs, his personal life suddenly the subject of intense public scrutiny. He was hounded by paparazzi, his every move documented, his every expression analyzed. The man who had once been the king of the city was now its most celebrated villain. In her quiet apartment, Victoria read the news with a strange sense of detachment. She had expected, it had known that Isabella would not go down quietly. But seeing the sordid details of her husband's betrayal laid bare for the world to see was a fresh wave of pain. "This is her doing," Victoria said to Arthur Vance over the phone, her voice cold and hard. "Of course it is," Arthur replied, his tone unflappable. "This is a classic scorched earth tactic. She's trying to devalue the company to create chaos. She's probably hoping that the board will oust Edward and put her in his place." "Will they?" Victoria asked, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "They might," Arthur admitted. "Which is why we need to make our move. The prenup you signed, it's ironclad, but it also has a morality clause, and your husband has just violated it in the most public way imaginable. So what does that mean? It means we have leverage, Mrs. Thorne. It means we can go after more than just the standard settlement. We can go after a piece of the pie. A very big piece." Arthur's plan was audacious. A masterstroke of legal maneuvering. He filed for divorce on Victoria's behalf, citing adultery and emotional distress. But he also filed an injunction, a move that would freeze a significant portion of Edward's personal assets, and more importantly, a portion of his shares in Thorne Holdings. The injunction sent a shockwave through the company, a move far more damaging than the gossip column headlines. It signaled to the board, to the shareholders, that this was not just a messy divorce. This was a hostile takeover bid, orchestrated by the scorned wife of their CEO. Edward was blindsided. He had expected a quiet, dignified divorce, a generous settlement, a clean break. He had not expected this. He had not expected his sweet, gentle Victoria to have this much fight in her. He called her his voice a mixture of anger and desperation. This time she answered. Her voice was cool, calm, and utterly devoid of the warmth he so desperately missed. "Victoria, what are you doing?" "An injunction. You're going to destroy the company. You did that yourself." "Edward," she replied, her voice steady. "You and Isabella. I'm just protecting my son's future. Our son, Victoria. Our son. You forfeited your right to say our when you knelt before another woman in my chair." She said the words sharp and precise. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. He had no response, no defense. She had checkmated him. The first move had been made. Victoria, the pawn in this game of power and betrayal, had just transformed into a queen. She had taken control of the board, had thrown the king and his treacherous knight into a state of disarray. The war was far from over. In fact, it had just begun. And as the dust settled from this first explosive move, one thing was clear. Victoria Thorne was not going down without a fight. She was going to burn his kingdom to the ground, and from the ashes build an empire of her own. The injunction was a masterstroke. It sent the board of Thorne Holdings into a tailspin. With a significant portion of Edward's shares, frozen, his control over the company he had built from the ground up was suddenly precarious. The vultures, as Arthur Vance had so eloquently put it, began to circle. Board members who had once been loyal allies now saw an opportunity, a power vacuum waiting to be filled. And at the center of this burgeoning chaos was Isabella Romano. The scandal she had orchestrated had backfired in a way she hadn't anticipated. She had intended to weaken Edward, to make him vulnerable to force the board's hand. She had not expected Victoria to retaliate with such a devastatingly effective legal maneuver. The injunction not only hurt Edward, it hurt the company, and by extension, it hurt her. She found herself in a precarious position. The board, while wary of Edward, was also deeply suspicious of her. They saw her as the catalyst for the crisis, a liability that threatened the stability of the entire enterprise. Her dream of taking the CEO's chair was slipping through her fingers. Desperate to regain control, Isabella made her next move, a move born of hubris and a chilling lack of morality. She decided to leak another story to Marco Diaz, a story that would not only discredit Victoria, but would also paint Edward as a victim, a man manipulated by a gold-digging, unstable wife. The story that appeared in the Diaz report was a masterpiece of malicious fiction. It painted Victoria as a social climber who had trapped Edward into marriage by getting pregnant. It hinted at a history of emotional instability, of irrational jealousy, of a woman who was using her pregnancy as a weapon to extort a fortune from her long-suffering husband. The article was a brutal character assassination, and it hit Victoria like a physical blow. To see her love for Edward, her joy over her pregnancy twisted into something so ugly, so venal, was a violation that cut deeper than the initial betrayal. The public, ever fickle, began to turn. The narrative shifted. Victoria, the wronged wife, was now a manipulative shrew. Edward, the cheating husband, was now a tragic figure, a man trapped in a toxic marriage. "This is a declaration of war," Arthur Vance said, his voice grim, as he read the article aloud to Victoria in his office. "She's not just trying to win a divorce settlement. She's trying to destroy you." Victoria, who had been so strong, so resolute, felt herself begin to crumble. The constant stress, the public humiliation, the weight of her pregnancy, it was all becoming too much. "I don't know if I can do this, Arthur," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I feel like I'm drowning." "You are not going to drown, Mrs. Thorne," Arthur said, his voice firm. "You are going to swim, and I am going to be the shark that swims alongside you." Arthur's team of investigators began to dig into Isabella's past, searching for any skeletons in her closet, any leverage they could use to fight back. And what they found was more shocking, more damning than they could have ever imagined. Isabella Romano, the self-made woman, the brilliant COO, had a secret, a very big secret. She had a daughter, a child. She had given up for adoption years ago, a child she had erased from her life in her relentless pursuit of power and success. The revelation was a bombshell. It was the ultimate hypocrisy. A woman who had painted Victoria as a manipulative mother was herself an absentee one. "This is it," Arthur said, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "This is the silver bullet." But Victoria hesitated. To use a child, an innocent, in this sordid affair felt wrong. It felt like stooping to Isabella's level. "I don't want to hurt her child," Victoria said, her hand instinctively going to her own belly. "This isn't about hurting the child," Arthur argued. "This is about exposing the hypocrisy of the woman who is trying to destroy you. This is about leveling the playing field." Victoria was torn. But then she thought about her own child, about the world. He would be born into a world where his mother was being vilified, his father's legacy in tatters. She thought about the cold, calculating cruelty of Isabella Romano, and her resolve hardened. "Do it," she said, her voice a whisper. The story of Isabella's secret daughter was leaked not to the salacious Marco Diaz, but to a respected, serious journalist at the New York Times. It was a strategic move designed to lend credibility to the story, to frame it not as gossip, but as a serious investigation into the character of a high-powered executive. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Isabella. The story, a deeply researched and sensitively written piece, painted a picture of a woman so consumed by ambition that she had sacrificed the most fundamental human connection. The public, which had been so quick to condemn Victoria, now turned on Isabella with a vengeance. She was no longer the brilliant, wronged woman. She was a monster, a modern-day Medea. The board of Thorn Holdings, already on edge, saw their worst fears realized. Isabella was not just a liability, she was a toxic asset. In a swift, unanimous decision, they terminated her contract, citing a breach of the company's ethics clause. Isabella was ruined. Her career, her reputation, her carefully constructed life. It was all gone. She had played with fire, and she had been consumed by the flames. Edward, watching this all unfold, was a man in turmoil. He felt a grim satisfaction at Isabella's downfall, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of guilt. He had created this monster, had fed her ambition, had been complicit in her rise, and he had allowed her to hurt Victoria in the most brutal way imaginable. He knew he had to do something to atone for his sins, to try and salvage some semblance of the man he once was. He called a press conference, a move that stunned his lawyers and the board of Thorn Holdings. He stood before the cameras, not as the powerful CEO, but as a broken man. He confessed everything: the affair, the lies, the deceit. He took full responsibility for his actions, for the pain he had caused his wife, for the chaos he had unleashed upon his company. He announced that he was taking an indefinite leave of absence from Thorn Holdings, that he was going to focus on his personal life, on trying to earn back the trust of the woman he loved. It was a stunning, unprecedented act of public contrition. It was also a brilliant strategic move. By falling on his own sword, he had preempted any further attacks, had taken the wind out of the sails of his detractors. He had, in a single act of humility, begun the long, arduous process of rebuilding his life and his reputation. Victoria watched the press conference from her apartment, her heart a tumultuous mix of emotions. She saw the pain in his eyes, the genuine remorse in his voice. But she also saw the man who had shattered her world, the man who had stood by while another woman sat in her chair. The war was not over, but the battlefield had shifted. Isabella was gone. Edward was humbled, and Victoria, the pregnant wife who had walked into her husband's office and found her life in ruins, was now in a position of unimaginable power. The future of Thorn Holdings, the fate of the man she had once loved, was now in her hands. The unraveling was complete, and from the wreckage, a new uncertain future was about to be born. Edward's public confession was a detonation at the heart of New York's elite society. It wasn't just news, it was a spectacle. The king had willingly abdicated, stripping himself of his crown and armor before the ravenous eyes of the world. For Victoria, watching the broadcast from the quiet solitude of her new apartment, the moment was a tangled knot of emotions. There was no triumphant joy, only a hollow, echoing vindication. He had finally spoken the truth, but the words were a ghost of what she had needed to hear in the sanctity of their life, not in a press conference staged to salvage a crumbling empire. Heeding the advice of his few remaining advisors, Edward vanished. He retreated to the sprawling Thorn estate in the Hamptons, a place he hadn't willingly visited since his father's funeral. The magnificent cedar-shingled mansion, usually a hub of summer galas, was now a cavernous hall of silence. He wandered its empty rooms, the sea air thick with the scent of salt and regret. He'd find himself standing in his father's old study, surrounded by leather-bound books on ethics and philosophy books he'd once dismissed as relics of a bygone era. He saw the man. His father was stern, principled, a builder of legacies, not just fortunes. The reflection that stared back at him from the darkened windows was a pale, haunted stranger. This self-imposed exile wasn't a vacation. It was a penance, a desperate, lonely attempt to find the man he was supposed to be, the man Victoria had once believed him to be. Back in Manhattan, the power vacuum at Thorne Holdings had become a vortex. The emergency boardroom was a theater of barely concealed panic. Loyalties once forged in steel and sealed over expensive steak dinners were now brittle as glass. Whispers of hostile takeovers and shareholder revolts slithered through the corridors. They were a ship without a captain taking on water, and the sharks were circling. "We're hemorrhaging value," grumbled Lawrence Meade, a portly, perpetually sweating board member who had been with the company for 3 decades. Edward's mea culpa was a disaster. He made us look weak, rudderless. What he made us look like is what we are countered another, a younger, sharper executive named Chen. This rot started at the top. The Isabella Romano affair proves it. It was into this den of circling wolves that Arthur Vance made his move. He requested a formal audience for his client Victoria Thorne with the full board of directors. The request was met with incredulity, then suspicion. "What does she want?" Meade demanded over a conference call. "To bleed us dry. To stand over the corporate corpse and pick the bones clean. We're legally obligated to hear her out." Arthur's voice had cut through the static, cool and sharp as a scalpel. "And I assure you, gentlemen, you'll want to hear what she has to say." Desperate for any semblance of a lifeline. They agreed. The days leading up to the meeting were a crucible for Victoria. The public humiliation of Isabella's articles had left scars, and the thought of facing that room of powerful, judgmental men was terrifying. Doubts gnawed at her in the quiet hours of the night. "I can't do this, Clara," she confessed one evening, her hands resting on her burgeoning belly as if to draw strength from the life within. "I'm a curator, not a CEO. They'll eat me alive." Clara, ever her anchor, took Victoria's hands. "They'll expect the weeping wife. They'll expect a victim. You will not give them that. You will give them the mother of this company's future. You are not fighting for yourself, Victoria. You are fighting for Theo." The name, the one they had chosen for her son, was a talisman. With Arthur coaching her on corporate law and Clara bolstering her spirit, Victoria prepared. She pored over financial reports, market analyses, and blueprints for stalled projects. She discovered a fire in her belly. She never knew she had an intellectual curiosity and a strategic mind that had been lulled to sleep by a life of comfortable luxury. She was not just Edward Thorne's wife anymore. She was becoming herself. The day of the meeting, she chose her armor with care, a simple, elegant navy blue dress that didn't hide her pregnancy, but framed it with dignity, a single strand of her grandmother's pearls, her only adornment. Flanked by Arthur and Clara, she walked into the boardroom on the 50th floor of Thorne Tower. The air was thick with tension and expensive cologne. A dozen pairs of eyes, ranging from skeptical to openly hostile, tracked her every move as she took her place at the head of the long mahogany table in the very seat Edward used to occupy. Lawrence Meade looked at her as if she were an insect to be squashed. She let the silence hang for a moment, meeting each of their gazes, her own calm and unwavering. Then she began to speak. Her voice, clear and steady, filled the room. She did not mention the affair. She did not speak of betrayal. She spoke of legacy. For 50 years, she began, Thorn Holdings has been a titan of industry, a symbol of New York's ambition. But in recent months, we have lost our way. We have prioritized profit over principle, expansion over ethics. The foundation my father-in-law built has been compromised not by market forces, but by a moral deficit. She laid out a vision that stunned them into silence. She spoke of pivoting towards sustainable green architecture, of creating community partnerships in the neighborhoods they developed, of establishing a transparent corporate culture where integrity was not just a word in a mission statement, but a measurable metric. She presented detailed proposals, cost-benefit analyses, and a clear 5-year plan. She wasn't emotional. She was surgical, informed, and utterly convincing. Lawrence Meade, unable to contain his disdain, finally interrupted. "This is all very idealistic, Mrs. Thorne. But this is the real world. What exactly do you want from us? A bigger settlement? A conscience fund?" Victoria met his condescending gaze without flinching. "What I want, Mr. Meade, is the future." She rose slowly, her presence commanding the room. "The shares that are currently frozen under the injunction represent a significant stake in this company. My son, the heir to the Thorne name, will one day inherit those shares. I am here today, not to tear this company down, but to rebuild it. I am here to protect my son's birthright." The room was silent. The mention of her son, the undisputed heir, shifted the power dynamic completely. "I have no desire to be CEO," she continued, delivering her masterstroke. "But I will be taking a seat on this board. From that position, I will oversee the implementation of this new vision. And I have a candidate to propose for CEO Daniel Chen, a man of integrity, experience, and a man who I know has the respect of this room." Chen, the young executive, looked utterly shocked. Then a slow look of understanding and respect dawned on his face. Victoria had not just come with a plan. She had come with an alliance. She had outmaneuvered every single one of them. The vote, when it was called, was a mere formality. It was unanimous. Victoria Thorne had walked into the lion's den and emerged its leader. News travels fast in the world of high finance. In the Hamptons, Edward received a call from a shell-shocked Lawrence Meade. He listened, his knuckles white, as he gripped the phone, as Meade recounted the events of the meeting. When the call ended, Edward didn't feel anger. He didn't feel resentment. He felt a profound, humbling awe. The gentle, art-loving woman he had married, the woman he had so carelessly betrayed and underestimated, had just saved his father's legacy from his own foolishness. She hadn't destroyed his kingdom. She had fortified it, remade it in her own stronger image. A few weeks later, as the first crimson leaves of autumn began to fall, Victoria gave birth to Theodore "Theo" Thorne. Holding him for the first time, she felt a peace that washed away the last vestiges of the storm. All the pain, all the fighting, it had all led to this perfect, tiny miracle in her arms. Edward heard the news from Arthur Vance, a single formal text message. He drove back to the city, a man hollowed out by guilt and electrified by a fragile, terrifying hope. He found her in a standard room in the maternity ward, the glittering city skyline, a backdrop to a scene of quiet intimacy. He paused in the doorway, a ghost at the feast. She wasn't wearing seraphine or surrounded by lavish bouquets. She was just Victoria, holding their son. Her face illuminated by a soft lamp, radiating a strength and serenity that took his breath away. She looked up, her eyes meeting his. There was no anger in them, but no welcome either. Just a quiet, guarded stillness. He took a hesitant step into the room, his expensive shoes silent on the linoleum floor. "He's beautiful," he whispered, his voice cracking the words, feeling hopelessly inadequate. "Yes," Victoria replied, her voice soft but firm, her gaze shifting back to the baby in her arms. "He is." She didn't ask him to come closer. She didn't offer for him to hold his son. The space between them was a chasm miles wide and fathoms deep, filled with the wreckage of their past. Edward stood there, a king in exile, looking at the two people who were his entire world, knowing he had no right to either of them. The reckoning was over. The drama had faded. This quiet, painful, uncertain moment was all that was left. It was not an ending. It was the first terrifying day of a long, arduous journey toward a dawn he could only pray he would one day be worthy enough to see. The story of Victoria Thorne is a stark reminder that the deepest betrayals can often forge the most unbreakable strength. We've journeyed with her from the dizzying heights of a fairy tale life to the crushing depths of heartbreak, and watched as she rose from the ashes, not as a victim, but as a victor. Her fight was not just for herself, but for the future of her unborn child, a testament to the fierce, unyielding power of a mother's love. But the question remains, can a love so brutally shattered ever be truly mended? Can Edward, a man stripped of his pride, ever truly earn redemption in Victoria's eyes, and in our own? If Victoria's journey of resilience and rebirth has moved you, if the drama of the Thorne Empire has captivated you, please show your support. Like this video, share it with others who appreciate a story of strength against all odds, and subscribe to our channel for more tales of love loss and the indomitable human spirit. Your engagement helps us bring more stories like this to light. What do you think Victoria should do next? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Tonight, the city's elite gather under the blaze of 1,000 flashbulbs. On the red carpet, billionaire titan Richard Sterling presents his magnum opus, a film destined for glory. On his arm is not his pregnant wife, but his mistress, Victoria Vance, draped in diamonds and defiance. The world watches, whispering of the scandalous affair. But the real story isn't the betrayal they see. It's the one they don't. In the shadows, a black town car glides to a halt. The door opens, and the real power behind the entire spectacle, the secret investor who funded every frame of this drama, is about to step into the light. And she's here to collect. The penthouse on Central Park West was less a home and more a museum of a life Olivia Hale felt she was merely curating. Every surface gleamed with a sterile perfection. Florentine marble floors, a collection of Rothkos that bled color into the vast white spaces, and floor-to-ceiling windows that presented New York City as a glittering, silent tableau. It was a life purchased, not built, a gilded cage constructed by her husband, Richard Sterling. From the outside, they were the city's golden couple. The self-made real estate and tech mogul with a jawline as sharp as his business acumen. She, the elegant, Wellesley-educated heiress to a quiet, old-money fortune. Their union 10 years prior had been the society event of the decade, a merger of New World ambition and Old World legacy. Olivia's family, the Hales, had built their wealth over generations in shipping and logistics, a silent, steady accumulation of power that dwarfed Richard's more ostentatious empire. But Olivia, reserved and intellectual, had never been comfortable with the weight of her inheritance. She had fallen for Richard's energy, his relentless drive, his promise to build a world so dazzling it would eclipse the long shadows of her ancestry. Now she understood he hadn't built a world for them. He had built one for him, and she was simply its most valuable and most trapped acquisition. At 7 months pregnant, the cage felt smaller than ever. The baby, a boy, was a constant fluttering reminder of the life she was bringing into this cold, curated world. Richard had been ecstatic about the pregnancy, but his joy felt performative. He saw the child not as a son, but as an heir, the final piece in the Sterling dynasty puzzle. He commissioned a nursery designed by Ken Folk, filled it with bespoke toys from Bonpoint, and spoke of boarding schools in Switzerland before the baby even had a name. He never asked Olivia how she felt. He never touched her belly with genuine wonder. He simply approved blueprints and signed checks. Her days were a meticulously scheduled rotation of prenatal yoga charity luncheons at the Modern and Fittings with her personal stylist for events she had no desire to attend. Richard insisted on her presence, her serene beauty, a perfect accessory to his power. He controlled everything: her schedule, her social circle, even her opinions in public, often finishing her sentences with a proprietary smile. "What my brilliant wife means to say is," he would begin before twisting her words into something that better served his narrative. She had long ago stopped correcting him. It was easier to retreat into the quiet world of her books and her private thoughts, a place he could not access. Her only true confidant was Benjamin Carter, the Hale family's long-serving financial advisor. A man in his late 60s, with kind eyes and a mind like a steel trap, Benjamin had known Olivia since she was a child. He managed the Hale Trust, a vast and complex entity that Olivia had inherited upon her parents' death 5 years ago. Richard, despite his best efforts, had never been granted access. It was the one part of her life that was exclusively hers, a fortress of financial independence he both resented and coveted. "He's leveraging Sterling Industries to the hilt for this film project," Benjamin had told her during their discreet weekly meeting at a private club, his voice a low murmur over the clink of silverware. "He's calling it Ascendant. Says it will be his legacy. He's poured nearly $100 million into it, and from what my sources tell me, the production is a chaotic mess." Olivia had felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. "He tells me it's a guaranteed success, an Oscar contender." Benjamin had given her a pitying look. "Olivia Richard is a brilliant bully in a boardroom. He knows nothing about filmmaking. He's hired a sycophantic director and is throwing money at problems that require artistry, not cash. The whispers in Hollywood are not kind." This was Richard's latest obsession. For the past year, Ascendant had consumed him. It was a bloated, self-important historical epic that he believed would cement his place not just as a titan of industry, but as a cultural icon. He spoke of it with a religious fervor, a passion he no longer reserved for his wife. And lately that passion seemed to be shared with another, Victoria Vance. Victoria was a painfully ambitious actress with a minor role in the film. Olivia had seen her name on casting sheets, and then with increasing frequency in gossip columns, pictured laughing a little too closely with Richard at industry events. She was everything Olivia was not: loud, overtly sensual, and desperate for the spotlight. Richard dismissed Olivia's concerns with practiced ease. "She's just part of the cast, darling. It's business. You're being hormonal." He used her pregnancy as a shield for his deceit, a convenient excuse for her intuition. The premiere was in 2 weeks, the culmination of Richard's grand ambition. It was to be held at the iconic TCL Chinese Theatre in Hollywood, a spectacle of unmatched glamour. A custom gown from Valentino hung in Olivia's closet, its soft ethereal fabric a stark contrast to the hard reality of her life. Richard had planned every detail of the night, envisioning their triumphant walk down the red carpet, his pregnant wife a symbol of his virility and stability, a Madonna for his burgeoning dynasty. But Olivia had her own plans. For months she had been moving her own pieces across the board, quietly, patiently. While Richard was busy playing movie mogul, she had been in near daily contact with Benjamin Carter. They hadn't been just talking. They had been strategizing. She had spent countless hours in a discreet office Benjamin had secured for her, mid-town, poring over financial statements, legal documents, and market analyses. The quiet, bookish heiress Richard thought he had married was a facade. Beneath it was the mind of her father, a shrewd and calculating strategist who had taught her that true power was never loud. It was silent, invisible, until the moment it struck. The Valentino gown would remain in its garment bag. She had commissioned another dress, a bespoke creation from Dior, its design a secret. It was a gown for a queen, not an accessory. As Richard finalized the seating charts for his big night, blissfully unaware, Olivia reviewed the final wire transfer confirmation on her encrypted laptop. The sum was staggering enough to make Richard's entire net worth look like pocket change. The transfer was complete. Phoenix Legacy Capital, a shell corporation she had established months ago, was now the sole owner of the Ascendant film project and its parent production company. Richard believed he was walking into his coronation. In reality, he was walking into a meticulously set trap. And Olivia, the woman he had underestimated, ignored and bejeweled, was about to become the architect of his spectacular downfall. The gilded cage was about to be broken, not from the outside, but from within. The 2 weeks leading up to the premiere were a masterclass in deception. Olivia played her part with an Oscar-worthy performance of her own. She was the docile, supportive wife, nodding along to Richard's monologues about distribution deals and marketing strategies. She feigned interest as he showed her clips from the film, his face illuminated by the screen, his ego filling every corner of their cavernous screening room. She saw the film for what it was. A self-indulgent mess, a testament to an unchecked male ego, beautifully shot but emotionally vacant. Her mornings were still for prenatal appointments and quiet contemplation, but her afternoons were a flurry of covert activity. The Midtown office Benjamin had arranged was her war room. Its windows overlooked the anonymous bustle of 6th Avenue, a world away from the judgmental quiet of her penthouse. Here, surrounded by files and protected by layers of security, she was not Mrs. Sterling. She was Olivia Hale, CEO, of her own destiny. With Benjamin's guidance, she had executed a complex financial maneuver. Richard's production company, Sterling Pictures, had been bleeding cash. He had taken out high-interest bridge loans from predatory lenders to keep the spiraling budget of Ascendant afloat using his own company's stock as collateral. He was over-leveraged and desperate. Olivia, through Phoenix Legacy Capital, had anonymously bought that debt, all of it. Then she'd offered a lifeline, a full buyout of the production company, and all its assets, including the film. Desperate to avoid a margin call that would crater his public company's stock price, Richard had agreed, blinded by the belief that some faceless European fund was bailing him out. He had no idea he had sold his legacy to the woman sleeping in his bed. The paperwork was signed by proxies. The money was wired through a labyrinth of international banks. To Richard, it was just a smart, if slightly humbling, business deal that saved him from ruin. He had boasted to Olivia about it one evening, over a dinner she barely touched. "Some fund out of Luxembourg saw the genius in the project," he'd said. swirling a glass of Chateau Margaux. They paid a premium. They know it's a winner. It just proves my instincts were right all along. Olivia had simply smiled and placed a hand on her belly, a gesture he mistook for placid agreement. The whispers grew louder. Her society friends, women whose lives were a tapestry of gossip and alliances, began calling with feigned concern. "Darling, I saw Richard at Balthazar with that actress." One might say her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "They looked so cozy. I'm sure it was just a business lunch." Olivia would thank them for their concern, her voice a calm, even sea, giving them no drama to feed on. She knew their pity was a performance, their calls a way to gauge the impending scandal. The true betrayal wasn't just the affair, it was the sheer disrespect. Richard had grown careless, arrogant. He started leaving his phone unlocked. One afternoon, while he was in the shower, a message flashed on the screen. It was from Victoria. "Can't wait to have you all to myself on the carpet. Let the old money hag watch from home. This is our night." A wave of nausea, wholly unrelated to her pregnancy, washed over Olivia. The clinical, business-like nature of her plan suddenly became intensely personal. It wasn't just about reclaiming her assets. It was about reclaiming her dignity. She forwarded the message to a secure email address. Another piece of evidence for the growing file her legal team, headed by the formidable divorce attorney Fiona Shaw, was compiling. Fiona was a shark in a Chanel suit, known for dismantling narcissistic husbands with surgical precision. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad on infidelity. Olivia, Fiona had assured her during a video call, but this, the financial deception, the commingling of funds he thought were his to finance this dalliance, this is grounds for a complete voiding of his claims. We will leave him with nothing but his tailored suits. The day before they were due to fly to Los Angeles, the final piece of Olivia's plan fell into place. Richard had installed a new piece of art in their foyer, a garish, oversized sculpture he'd paid a fortune for. As the installers left, Olivia noticed a discrepancy on the invoice left on the hall table. It was billed to the Hale Trust. She felt a cold fury course through her. He had become so arrogant that he was now forging her digital signature to buy trinkets for their home, her home. He was stealing from her brazenly. She called Benjamin immediately. "He's been accessing the household accounts linked to the trust, Ben, for non-essentials, for art, for wine, for God knows what else." Benjamin's voice was grim. "I'll run a full audit. This is wire fraud, Olivia. It's a federal crime. This is the nail in the coffin." That evening, Richard came home buzzing with excitement for the trip. He found Olivia in the nursery, standing over the crib. "Look at this, Liv," he said, holding out a stunning diamond necklace. "A little something for my leading lady to wear tomorrow night. It's a Harry Winston. Nothing but the best for you." Olivia looked at the cold, glittering stones. She knew it had likely been purchased with her own money. She pictured Victoria's smug text. "Our night." She forced a smile, allowing him to fasten the clasp around her neck. The diamonds felt like ice against her skin. "It's beautiful, Richard. Thank you." He kissed her cheek, a perfunctory gesture. "Get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow the world is going to see what a sterling can do." "Oh, I'm sure it will," Olivia said softly, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. "I am absolutely sure of it." He missed the chilling certainty in her tone. He saw only his pregnant wife, adorned in his diamonds, ready to play her part. As he slept that night, a deep, untroubled sleep of the pathologically arrogant, Olivia sat in the darkness of their living room. the city lights spread out before her. She was not a victim waiting for her fate. She was a general on the eve of battle, her strategy complete, her armies in position, waiting for the dawn. The silk corridors of her life had been full of whispers of his betrayal, but the loudest sound was the one no one else could hear, the ticking of a clock counting down to his ruin. The Los Angeles air was thick with the scent of exhaust fumes and night-blooming jasmine, a uniquely Hollywood perfume. The sky was a bruised twilight purple, a dramatic backdrop for the Klieg lights crisscrossing in front of the TCL Chinese Theater. Hollywood Boulevard was shut down for blocks, a river of black town cars, flowing toward the premiere of Ascendant. It was the biggest event of the season, and the atmosphere crackled with an energy that was part anticipation, part bloodlust. Richard Sterling, true to form, had ensured the spectacle was monumental. The red carpet, a shade of crimson so deep it looked almost black under the relentless flash of cameras, was wider and longer than regulation. An orchestra played the film's overwrought score from a raised platform. The press line was a gauntlet of reporters and television crews from every major outlet, a shouting, jostling pack of hyenas, sensing a kill. Olivia watched it all from a live feed on a tablet inside her own car, parked a block away on a quiet side street. She was in a black Escalade, with tinted windows so dark they were practically opaque. Beside her sat Fiona Shaw, her lawyer exuding an aura of lethal calm. On Olivia's lap was a slim leather portfolio containing the documents that would detonate her husband's world. She was dressed in the custom Dior gown, a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that fell in elegant folds over her pregnant form. It was a statement of power and grace, the armor for the battle ahead. She felt preternaturally calm, the frantic anxiety of the past months having coalesced into a sharp, diamond-hard focus. "He's arriving," Fiona said, her eyes fixed on the screen. On the tablet, Richard's Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up to the curb. The door opened and he emerged, beaming, resplendent, in a Tom Ford tuxedo. He waved to the crowd, a practiced, regal gesture. He was a king arriving at his coronation. Then he turned and extended his hand. But the hand that took his was not Olivia's. Victoria Vance stepped out of the car. She was a vision of calculated provocation. Her dress was a sliver of gold lame that clung to her body like a second skin, its neckline plunging to her navel. She was draped in diamonds that were clearly on loan, but she wore them as if they were her birthright. She clung to Richard's arm, her smile a triumphant, predatory slash of red lipstick. A collective gasp, audible even through the tablet speaker, rippled through the press line. The cacophony of camera shutters intensified, becoming a frantic, percussive roar. Reporters began shouting questions, not about the film, but about the woman on the director's arm. "Richard, where's Olivia? Is this your official date? Mr. Sterling." "Victoria, are you the new Mrs. Sterling?" Richard handled it with the smooth arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. He held up a hand for quiet, a smug grin playing on his lips. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is about celebrating art. My wife, Olivia, is resting at home. Her pregnancy has been a bit tiring and she sends her deepest regrets. But she wanted me to have a wonderful night, and the lovely Victoria, one of our brilliant stars, was gracious enough to accompany me." He delivered the lie without a flicker of shame. He had painted Olivia as a frail, delicate creature, too weak to attend his triumph, while he paraded his mistress as a vibrant stand-in. It was a public dismissal, a calculated humiliation designed to put her in her place. Victoria, for her part, lapped it up. She posed and preened, tilting her head, just so ensuring the cameras caught the glint of the teardrop diamond earrings that Olivia recognized from a recent receipt she'd found. She whispered in Richard's ear, laughing as he squeezed her hand. They were not just attending an event. They were staking a claim, announcing their union to the world on the biggest stage imaginable. Inside the Escalade, Olivia felt a cold, clear rage settle over her. She watched Richard steer Victoria down the carpet, stopping for interviews with Entertainment Tonight and Variety. He spoke glowingly of the film of his vision of the incredible journey. Victoria stood beside him, nodding her eyes wide with adoration, a perfect portrait of the devoted ingenue. They were a team, a partnership built on her money and his lies. "Are you ready?" Fiona asked gently, her voice cutting through Olivia's icy focus. Olivia looked away from the screen, her reflection a pale, determined oval in the darkened window. The woman on the screen, the weak, tired wife resting at home, was a fiction Richard had created. The woman in this car was the reality he had ignored. He just sealed his fate, Olivia said, her voice devoid of emotion. She opened the leather portfolio, her manicured fingers tracing the embossed logo of Phoenix Legacy Capital. He thinks this is his masterpiece. He has no idea he's just the star of mine. She took a deep, steadying breath, the life inside her giving a gentle kick as if in agreement. "Let's go," she said to the driver. "It's time for the investor to make an appearance." The Escalade pulled out from the side street, its engine a low growl. It bypassed the long line of cars and, following a pre-arranged route with the event security that Olivia's team had organized, headed directly for the front of the theater. It glided past the press line, a silent black shark moving through chaotic waters. As Richard and Victoria posed for one last set of photos at the theater entrance, basking in the apex of their stolen moment, the Escalade came to a stop just behind them. The cameras, momentarily distracted, swung toward the new arrival. A security guard, one of Olivia's, stepped forward and opened the rear door. A single elegant heel in a matching midnight blue Dior pump touched the crimson carpet. Then another. Olivia emerged from the car. She stood for a moment, letting the scene wash over her. The flashing lights, the shouting reporters, the stunned, confused faces. She saw Richard turn, his smile faltering as he saw her. She watched the color drain from his face, his confident posture crumbling in an instant. She saw Victoria's triumphant smirk curdle into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The whispers died. The shouting stopped. For a single breathless moment, the entire red carpet fell silent. All eyes locked on the pregnant woman in the midnight blue gown who was not supposed to be there. Olivia met her husband's gaze across the sea of stunned faces. Her expression was not one of anger or heartbreak. It was the calm, placid, and utterly terrifying look of a queen arriving to reclaim her throne. The show was about to begin. The interior of the TCL Chinese Theatre was a cathedral of Golden Age Hollywood, its opulent chinoiserie-inspired decor, a testament to a century of cinematic dreams. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the low hum of 1,000 privileged conversations. The industry's most powerful players, studio heads, A-list actors, legendary directors, and ruthless agents had all come to witness Richard Sterling's folly or triumph. The consensus whispered behind manicured hands was leaning heavily toward the former. Richard, having hastily abandoned Victoria, with a publicist on the carpet, had regained some of his composure. He worked the room with the frantic energy of a man trying to outrun a freight train. He glad-handed, he backslapped, he laughed too loudly. He projected an aura of unbothered confidence, but those who knew him well could see the panic tightening the skin around his eyes. He avoided any mention of Olivia, pretending her arrival had been a mirage, a trick of the flashing lights. As the lights dimmed, signaling the start of the presentation, a palpable sense of anticipation filled the theatre. Richard took the stage to a round of polite, if not entirely enthusiastic applause. He stood at the podium, a single spotlight, illuminating him the very picture of the visionary creator he so desperately wanted to be. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "A film is not just a project, it's a dream that takes courage, conviction, and above all vision. Ascendant is my vision. It's a story of greatness, of overcoming insurmountable odds to build a lasting legacy." He spoke for 10 minutes, a rambling, self-aggrandizing speech that was more about his own perceived genius than the film itself. He thanked his cast, his crew, and his partners, all while studiously avoiding the 2-ton elephant in the room, his wife, who was now seated in a discreetly arranged private box overlooking the stage, flanked by Fiona Shaw and 2 stone-faced security guards. As Richard reached his crescendo, preparing to introduce the film, a man in a headset walked onto the stage and handed him a note. Richard's flow faltered. He read the note, his brow furrowing in confusion. He looked out at the expectant faces, a flicker of genuine bewilderment crossing his features. The host of the evening, a well-known late-night personality hired to add a veneer of charm to the proceedings, walked back to the podium. He took the microphone from a stunned Richard. "Ladies and gentlemen, a slight change to our program," the host announced, his professional smile unwavering. "It seems Mr. Sterling has one more key partner to thank tonight. The journey of making a film of this scale is perilous, and often it requires a guardian angel to see it through. Tonight, the primary financial backer of Ascendant, the true force who made this evening possible, has decided to step out of the shadows. Please join me in welcoming the founder and principal of Phoenix Legacy Capital." A confused murmur rippled through the audience. Phoenix Legacy Capital was a name no one in Hollywood knew. Richard stared dumbfounded as a gentle spotlight activated, illuminating the path from the private box to the stage. And then she appeared. Olivia descended the short staircase, moving with an unhurried, regal grace. The midnight blue Dior gown flowed around her, the fabric shimmering under the stage lights. Her pregnancy was not something to be hidden, but a symbol of her vitality, her future. She looked directly at the audience, her expression serene and unreadable. Every eye in the theatre was locked on her. The silence was absolute, heavy, and profound. The audience was a who's who of Hollywood and Wall Street people who understood power, money, and betrayal better than anyone. They could smell blood in the water, and they were witnessing the most exquisitely executed corporate and social execution in recent memory. You could see the calculations happening in real time on their faces as they connected the dots, the humiliated wife, the mysterious investment firm, the public flaunting of the Mistress. Olivia reached the podium. The host discreetly faded into the background. She stood beside her husband, though a universe seemed to separate them. Richard was ashen, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. He looked as though he'd been struck by lightning. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Olivia turned to him, her voice calm and clear, amplified by the microphone, but intimate in its delivery. "You seem to have forgotten to thank me, Richard." She then turned her attention to the captivated audience. "Good evening," she said, her voice steady and resonant, holding the attention of every person in the room. "My name is Olivia Hale. You may know me as Olivia Sterling. For the past year, my husband has poured his heart and a considerable amount of capital into this film. What he may not have understood is that the capital he was pouring was mine. A collective audible gasp swept through the theatre. Victoria Vance, seated in the third row, looked as if she might faint. When my husband's passion project faced financial ruin, Olivia continued, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. My private equity firm, Phoenix Legacy Capital, acquired the film and its parent production company in their entirety. I did this because I too believe in the power of legacy. But legacy is not something you build on a foundation of deceit. It is built on integrity, strength, and truth. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The quiet, devastating precision of her revelation was more powerful than any shouting match could ever be. I am the sole investor, owner, and executive producer of Ascendant, and I am incredibly proud to present this film to you tonight, the first of many from the newly restructured and rebranded Hale Pictures. She placed a hand on her stomach. My son, the heir to the Hale legacy, will be born into a world where his mother's strength is the foundation, not her silence. Enjoy the show. With that, she gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The stage lights went down, plunging Richard into darkness, and the theatre was bathed in the glow of the screen as the opening credits of the film began to roll. But no one was watching the screen. Every single person was staring at the stage, at the silhouette of Richard Sterling, a king standing amidst the ruins of his own kingdom, utterly and completely dethroned by the Queen he never saw coming. The moment the house lights came up after the film, which no one had actually watched, the theatre erupted not into applause, but into a frenzy of frantic, hushed communication. iPhones glowed in the darkness like a field of fireflies, as agents, producers, and executives messaged their bosses, their assistants, their rivals. The news was already breaking online. Variety and The Hollywood Reporter had reporters typing furiously their headlines, practically writing themselves, "Sterling Premier Stunner Jilted Wife Revealed as Secret Mogul." The aftermath was a perfectly orchestrated whirlwind of Olivia's design. As the crowd began to file out their faces, a mixture of shock and schadenfreude, Richard made a desperate move. He lunged for Olivia, who was being calmly escorted toward a backstage exit by her security team. "Olivia." "What the hell was that?" he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. His face contorted in a mask of rage and humiliation. Before he could get within 5 feet of her, one of the security guards, a large, impassive man named Frank, stepped into his path. "Mr. Sterling, I'd advise you to keep your distance. Get out of my way." "That's my wife," Richard snarled, trying to push past him. Olivia stopped and turned, her expression as cool and placid as a frozen lake. "No, Richard," she said, her voice cutting through his anger. "I am your primary shareholder, and you are a liability I am about to liquidate. You are not to speak to me again without your lawyer present." "My lawyer? What are you talking about?" he stammered, the last vestiges of his bravado crumbling. "This is our life, Olivia. Our child. You made it very clear tonight who you consider to be your partner." Olivia replied, her gaze flicking for a split second toward the main floor, where Victoria was being swallowed by a scrum of paparazzi, her face pale and tear-streaked. "As for our child, he will be a Hale. You have forfeited any right to the Sterling name in his life. You'll be hearing from Fiona Shaw in the morning. She'll have the divorce papers. I suggest you find competent counsel. You're going to need it." She turned and walked away without a backward glance, leaving him standing there, impotent and exposed under the harsh backstage lights. His world had been dismantled in less than 15 minutes. The humiliation for Victoria was of a different, more public and arguably more brutal variety. As she tried to flee the theatre, she was cornered. The same reporters who had fawned over her an hour ago were now circling like sharks. "Victoria, were you aware? Mrs. Sterling owned the film. How does it feel to be the other woman in the biggest Hollywood scandal of the year? Richard Sterling is broke. Was he lying to you all along?" Her face, once a portrait of smug triumph, was now a crumpled mess of fear and confusion. Her borrowed diamonds suddenly looked cheap, her dress garish. She was no longer the ascendant star. She was a C-list actress caught in the crossfire of a billionaire's war, a footnote in a story that was now entirely about Olivia Hale. Her agent wasn't answering her calls. The studio car that had brought her was nowhere to be found. She was left stranded on the curb, a pariah in gold lame, as the industry that had momentarily embraced her turned its back with ruthless speed. Backstage, the power dynamics had shifted with seismic force. Harvey Goldstein, the notoriously aggressive head of the film's distribution studio, who had been blowing smoke with Richard all night, now approached Olivia's temporary green room, his face wreathed in a sycophantic smile. "Olivia, may I call you Olivia?" "A masterful piece of theatre," he boomed, attempting to take her hand. "Absolutely brilliant. I knew this film had a visionary behind it. I told my team, I said, this project has a quiet strength, a real intelligence." "It was you all along," Fiona Shaw intercepted him. "Mr. Goldstein, all future communications regarding distribution will go through my office. We will be in touch to renegotiate your deal given the change in ownership." Goldstein's smile faltered. He was a shark who had just realized he was in a tank with a great white. He nodded meekly and backed away. The chaos spread. Richard's phone was blowing up with calls from his board of directors at Sterling Industries, from his bankers, from his PR team, who were in full-blown panic mode. The stock for Sterling Industries was predicted to go into free fall when the market opened. News of his financial recklessness of leveraging the public company to fund his private folly was leaking. The SEC would surely be launching an investigation by morning. Olivia, meanwhile, was an island of tranquility in the hurricane she had created. In the back of the Escalade, speeding away from the theatre, she took off the Harry Winston necklace Richard had given her. It felt tainted. She handed it to Fiona. "See that this is returned, and check the provenance. I have a feeling it was purchased fraudulently." Fiona nodded, placing it carefully in her briefcase. "The wire fraud charges will be the final nail. He won't know what hit him." For the first time that night, Olivia allowed herself a moment to feel the weight of it all. It was not triumph she felt, not exactly. It was a grim sense of finality, a necessary amputation. She had cut out the diseased part of her life to save herself and her child. She placed a hand on her belly, where a gentle flutter reminded her of the future. The reckoning was not just about Richard's downfall, it was about her own ascent. From the ashes of her marriage, Phoenix Legacy Capital was truly born, and so was she. The real work was just beginning. The days that followed the premiere were not a whirlwind of chaotic emotion, but a campaign of systematic and ruthless efficiency. While Richard Sterling was publicly imploding, Olivia Hale was quietly building an empire on the rubble of his. She operated not out of a gleaming skyscraper, but from the discreet, elegant offices of Hale Pictures, the newly christened company that had once been Sterling Pictures. The name change was the first order of business, a symbolic and legal cleansing. The Sterling name, once a mark of aggressive success, was now synonymous with scandal, fraud, and public humiliation. Fiona Shaw. Olivia's attorney filed for divorce the morning after the premiere. The petition was delivered to a disheveled Richard at the Beverly Hills Hotel, where he had been holed up, refusing to take calls. The documents were a work of legal art. They cited the infidelity clause in their prenuptial agreement, which was now indisputable thanks to his red carpet stunt. But Fiona went further. She attached a thick appendix detailing Richard's financial malfeasance, the fraudulent use of trust funds, the commingling of personal and corporate assets, and the wire fraud related to his unauthorized purchases. "He's been served," Fiona informed Olivia via a secure video call. "His legal team is in shock. They thought his prenup was airtight. They never imagined you had the evidence to have it thrown out entirely and sue him for damages." Richard's arrogance had been his undoing. He had assumed Olivia was the passive, ignorant wife he had molded her to be. He never imagined she would have the foresight to have their prenup amended 5 years prior, shortly after her parents' death with the help of Benjamin Carter. The amendment, which Richard had barely glanced at before signing, contained a bad actor clause of draconian severity. Any criminal financial activity or gross mismanagement involving her personal or trust assets would render the entire agreement null and void and revert all claims back to her. The SEC launched its formal investigation into Sterling Industries within 48 hours. The news sent the stock plummeting by 70%. The board of directors, in a desperate act of self-preservation, convened an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to oust Richard as chairman and CEO. He was escorted from the building that bore his name by security, a final ignominious exit captured by a lone paparazzo that went viral instantly. While Richard's world crumbled, Olivia's expanded. She took immediate and decisive control of Hale Pictures. Her first act was to fire the sycophantic director of Ascendant and bring in a respected female editor, a Hollywood veteran known for saving troubled films. "The footage is beautiful," the editor, a woman named Catherine Hardwick, told Olivia after a marathon screening session. "But the story is a mess. It's a monument to his ego. But there's another story in here, a quieter, more powerful one. If you let me, I think I can find it." Olivia gave her carte blanche. "Find it," she said. "The budget is no longer an issue." She proved to be a natural leader, a stark contrast to Richard's blustering, dictatorial style. She listened to her team. She made decisions based on data and instinct, not ego. She promoted competent women within the company, who had been overlooked by Richard. Morale, which had been in the gutter, skyrocketed. The industry, which had been prepared to watch her fail, began to watch with a newfound respect. Olivia Hale was not a dilettante or a scorned wife seeking revenge. She was a serious, formidable player. Victoria Vance, meanwhile, had vanished. Dropped by her agent, her publicist, and her social circle, she became a Hollywood ghost. The notoriety she had craved had become a toxic brand. Every producer was afraid to touch her, lest they incur the wrath of the industry's newest and most powerful mogul. She had hitched her wagon to a falling star, and was now buried in its wreckage. There were rumors she had left the country, her 15 minutes of fame having cost her everything. Olivia never gave Victoria a second thought. She was focused on the future. She liquidated several of Richard's non-performing assets that she now controlled: a garish mansion in Miami, a private jet, his collection of absurdly expensive watches, and reinvested the capital into a new slate of films for Hale Pictures. She established a fund to support female directors and writers, turning her personal story into a mission. Benjamin Carter continued to work by her side, his pride in the woman she had become evident in his quiet, steadfast support. "Your father would be immensely proud, Olivia," he told her one afternoon, as they reviewed the company's quarterly projections, which were already looking healthier than they ever had under Richard. "You have his mind for strategy, but your mother's grace." The legal battle with Richard was brutal but short. Faced with irrefutable evidence of fraud and the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence, he had no choice but to settle. He walked away with a fraction of what he thought he was owed enough to live comfortably, but never to wield power again. He was stripped of his companies, his reputation, and his access to the world he had fought so hard to conquer. He was a ghost on Wall Street, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Olivia, now legally Olivia Hale, again stood in her new office, which overlooked the Hollywood Hills. It was sleek and modern, decorated with a quiet, confident taste that was entirely her own. There were no monuments to ego, only works of art she genuinely loved and photographs of the people who mattered. Her empire was not built from the ashes of Richard's, but from the solid foundation of her own strength, a foundation that had been there all along, waiting for the gilded crystal to fall away. 6 months later, Los Angeles was in the full throes of awards season. The city buzzed with a nervous, glittery energy, and the most talked-about film, the dark horse contender that had come out of nowhere to sweep the critics' awards and rack up a dozen Oscar nominations, was Ascendant. Under the masterful hand of its new editor and the clear-eyed vision of its executive producer, the film had been transformed. The bloated, self-important epic about a male conqueror had been recut into a subtle, poignant tragedy about the quiet, brilliant woman behind his throne, the wife whose intellect he exploited and whose heart he broke. It was a masterpiece of subversive storytelling, a film that held a mirror up to a system that so often credited men for the work of women. The irony was lost on no one. Olivia Hale sat for an interview in the living room of her new home in Bel Air. The house was nothing like the cold, sterile penthouse in New York. It was warm and inviting, filled with light books and the happy clutter of a life being truly lived. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the soft curve of her heavily pregnant belly. She was due any day. The interviewer was a seasoned journalist from Vanity Fair, a woman known for her incisive profiles of powerful figures. "Ms. Hale," she began, "in 6 months you've gone from a society wife to one of the most powerful producers in Hollywood. Your ex-husband is facing federal indictment. Your film is the front-runner for Best Picture. People are calling it the most brilliant act of revenge in modern history." Olivia offered a small, thoughtful smile. She had grown into her power with a grace that felt both innate and hard-won. "I don't see it as revenge," she said, her voice calm and measured. "Revenge is an emotional act. This was a business decision. My ex-husband made a series of poor investments, both personally and professionally. I simply corrected the market. But you can't deny the personal element. The premiere, it was a moment that will be talked about for decades. The premiere was a necessary unveiling of the truth," Olivia conceded. "For too long, I allowed a false narrative to be written for me. I was cast as a supporting character in my own life. I decided it was time for a rewrite. I wanted my son to know that his mother wasn't a victim. She was the author of her own story." Her story had indeed become a source of inspiration. Hale Pictures was flourishing, championing stories that challenged the status quo. She had become a mentor to young women in the industry, her name synonymous with integrity and a quiet, unshakable strength. Later that week, on the night of the Academy Awards, Olivia walked the red carpet alone. She was not a +1 or an accessory. She was the main event. Dressed in a stunning, custom-made Schiaparelli gown that celebrated her pregnancy, she radiated a serene confidence that outshone all the starlets in their borrowed jewels. She didn't stop for many interviews, offering only a gracious smile to the sea of photographers. When Ascendant won Best Picture, the entire Dolby Theatre rose to its feet. Olivia walked to the stage to accept the award, joined by her creative team. She held the golden statuette, its weight feeling solid and real in her hands. She looked out at the sea of faces, the brightest stars in the cinematic firmament, all looking up at her. "I'm told a legacy is something you leave behind," she said, her voice clear and strong, echoing through the theatre and to millions watching around the world. "But I believe a legacy is also what you build for the future. I want to thank the Academy for this incredible honor. I accept it on behalf of all the women whose vision, strength, and brilliance have been the silent scaffolding for someone else's dream. May we all find the courage to claim our own stories." She ended her speech with a hand on her belly. "And this is for you," she whispered, a message meant only for her son, "our new beginning." As the applause thundered around her, Olivia Hale smiled. This was not the end of a dramatic story of betrayal and revenge. It was the beginning of a legacy not inherited, but forged in fire, reborn from the ashes and shining brighter than any Klieg light. A legacy of her own making. The story of Olivia Hale is more than just a tale of betrayal and spectacular revenge. It's a masterclass in empowerment. It's a testament to the quiet strength that lies dormant in those who are underestimated, and the incredible power that is unleashed when they finally decide to claim their own narrative. Olivia's journey from a silent partner in a gilded cage to the architect of her own empire reminds us that the greatest power isn't loud and boastful. It's strategic, intelligent, and patient. It's the power of knowing your own worth, even when the world tries to diminish it. If this story of triumph and justice resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of rewriting your own destiny, please show your support. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful narratives to light.